There are over 50 plus different styles of music in this world, and today I have grouped them into 9 of the most popular genres to rank. Starting with pop, J-pop, and K-pop, we have the Monarch Mark IIIs. Here we're looking for an IEM that has an exciting boosted sub-bass response as well as extended treble in order to create that liveliness sound. There needs to be some mid-bass for bass guitars and male vocals in order for them to not only sound more natural, but also to help balance out the upper mids, which tends to be overboosted on many of these pop tracks. The vocal gain around 3K should also be pulled back a bit for that same exact reason, to avoid shoutiness as well as create that full sounding natural timbre. Now, what about the variations? Well, they're pretty close. On well-mastered tracks, the variations sound just as good as the Mark IIIs, maybe even smoother depending on the song. But the problem is, when I hit shuffle, 80% of the time there will be a song that's either too thin because of the variations mid-bass scoop, or just too shouty because the female vocals are overboosted and there's not enough mid-bass to balance it out along with the extra 3K gain on the variations. Both the Monarchs and variations have some sort of wispy treble, so they're not perfect, but the Monarch fixes those issues and is my pick if you are listening to a lot of pop. And if you're just starting out, you can try the Truthier Clinical Red, which is a budget version of it. However, things flip when it comes to electronic music like EDM, house, trance, where the variations are better because of its more pronounced sub-bass as a result of its low-end to mid-range contrast. Because of the scoop, there's a less linear transition into the lower mids and creates a more noticeable sub-bass or subwoofer-like presentation, which works extremely well as most of the drops for EDM and electronic music are sub-bass oriented. The vocal shoutiness is also less of an issue because, well, there's just less vocals in general as the tracks are mostly instrument based, so the gain is less obvious and you feel less fatigue in general. Now, a budget set for this genre would be something like the HBB Con, which is similar to the variations but just not as smooth and detailed. Moving on, for rock, metal, and punk, we're looking for speed, separation, but also clarity in the lower mids for bass guitars, so no mid-bass scoops at all. We want a slight bass boost into a gradual glide back to neutral around the 400 Hz mark. Too much mid-bass will mud the sound and hurt the perceived separation of instruments as the tracks are already very busy. So the slight glide allows the mid-bass to be presented evenly throughout each section with more clear bass guitar notes versus a scoop, for example. We also want less emphasis in the upper mids region to avoid fatiguing electric guitars and overly metallic-y timbre. Instead, we're looking for some air past 10K for that airy cymbal crash and an open sense of stage. A perfect fit for this would be the Ledger Cadenza 12, but it does cost more than $2,000, so a more affordable version of it would be the HBB Heyday. Likewise, for indie, acoustic, country, and slower paced music, you also want a similar bass glide for the full sound, but the upper mids can be a little bit more as the tracks are more forgiving with less energy in general. The Supernova is a great set for this and doesn't completely break the bank as well. It's still expensive, but not insanely expensive like $1,000, $2,000. A starter version of it would be the 7Hz Sonus or the SimGot EM6L, depending on how forward you like your vocals. But speaking of vocals, for ballads, folk, and singer-songwriter, which are more vocal focused, you want a set that's more neutral and has full, rich, powerful, and extended vocals. You already know where this is going. My pick is obviously the Sophier's Ars-5. It's the best set for vocal-centric tracks. However, for those who don't want in-your-face vocals, and it could be a bit much for some people, a more relaxed presentation version of it would be the OG The Audio Oracle, which is also great, very detailed and airy, and just fully extended vocals. Now, I personally don't think you need that much technical headroom for this genre because most songs are more simple, aka you should just save your money. But if you really want the best, the Monarch Mark II does have the most detail and resolution. Now, is it worth it? Well, depends on how much you're willing to spend and if you listen to any other busier genres. If you do, then yeah, it is. But I personally still prefer the Ars-5, and around $150 you can also get a very similar natural vocal experience with the original C Audio Yume. As for jazz, blues, reggae, and soul, we want a fuller, warmer and richer sound that creates that musicality and emotional experience. So no mid-bass scoop and a decent amount of mid-bass, not too much upper mids because the energy from horns can get a little bit jarring and you want some decent treble extension. Ideally, we wanted to have great separation for the instruments, but that's harder to accomplish with the added warmness into the lower mids, as there will be some form of coloring and masking to the lower mids. We're looking for a linear bass glide into the lower mids with a mid bass bump for emphasis in the rhythmic section, so something like the Dark Magician, but that's discontinued, so instead you can go for the Zen's Up, which has very tight and well controlled bass, or the Meteor, which is more airy and has more energy in the mid bass. And if you really like it thick, you can go for the Sophier's Twilight, as it is the most meatiest, the most full sounding and body, but still has a well executed warm sound signature. Moving on, for classical, orchestral, or OST music, we want a set with a big soundstage and incredible layering capabilities. It doesn't need to have a lot of low end, so a slight glide will do the job. And as for the upper mids, it should be on the smoother side, similar to the jazz genre, and with a lot of treble air for the sense of stage. A good example of this would actually be the 64 Audio U12T, which is not the best when it comes to vocals, but there are no vocals here, so the scoop or the hollowness is less obvious and is perceived more as depth to the stage instead. The U12T's bass is very punchy and fast. It's not the best when it comes to slam and the physicality compared to a dynamic driver, but the BAs are very well implemented with little BA timbre, and overall the speed is just very great for technical performance and separation. It's also got a lot of air and the best layering I've heard so far, so combined with the pushback sense of stage, it's perfect for these scenarios. A more affordable version of this would be the IE200, and 64 Audio also recently came out with the Valor, which I haven't heard yet, but the graph looks very similar to the U12T, and based off of first impression, it seems like it's just a U12T with dynamic drivers for the low end, aka most likely better bass, so the Valor is also a potential option if you value low end. As for hip hop, R&B, and rap, here we obviously want a decent amount of bass in both the sub bass as well as the mid bass, so again, no scoop. The upper mid should have a decent amount of gain for vocals, and the treble shouldn't be overly sharp or energetic because there tends to be a lot of electronic elements like auto-tune, reverb, synths that can sound jarring if there's just too much treble. I found that a slight V works the best here to bring that energy for the tracks to come alive. So something like the Sony IER Z1R works really well, as it's probably the best in terms of bass, as well as having the most natural and detailed treble without sounding harsh. The vocals are a bit pushed back, but that could just be a fit issue because the nozzle and just the IEM is huge, since many without the issues have said that the mids are perfectly fine. So if you have average ears like mine or want more vocal gain, then maybe try the Dunu Zen Pro instead, as well as the Tongzu Furu being the beginner set for this genre. And lastly, for alternative and experimental stuff, I highly recommend a set that has great dynamics, aka no sudden scoops and peaks, very smooth and just even throughout the whole frequency. This is because there's just a shit ton of stuff going on in many of these tracks, so any masking is most obvious here and really hurts the overall experience. There's also a lot of dynamic contrast going on, switching from silence to suddenly just bombarding you with like a crap ton of information. There's a lot of sudden switch up between frequencies, which is why any peaks or sudden scoops will sound a lot more jarring and harsh, taking you right out of the immersion. My pick for this would be the Mess Mark II, as it's got great dynamics with a textured low end, and the pinpoint imaging highlights the micro nuances in the track in a way that's not overly harsh. The pushback upper mids and delayed gain makes perceived notes less forward and more laid out in front of you, so less in your face and less fatiguing, maintaining the detail that the Mess is known for while having an open sense of staging. Now the vocals are definitely pushed back, which is fine because most of the tracks don't really focus on the vocals, but if you really like vocals, then the EJ07M is also a great alternative, and with the P1 Max being the starter version for this category. But with all that being said, I hope this guide was helpful. Comment below if I missed anything, and I'll see everyone in the next video.